So, a little more information on the three laws of hold-on partons. Integrate upwards, cooperate and compete sideways. Enable agency and structure downwards. Or for units of culture that are inanimate, like letters and words and sentences, external culture. We can use the term command and control downwards instead of enable agency and structure downwards, but they both pretty much amount to the same thing. Because we just had this great AppEEL webinar, and there were some great discussion points that came up in the Q&A. So there were three speakers: Dean Keith Simonton, David Sloan Wilson, and I talked about my forthcoming book, P3 of EC. There's the long title, coming in November 2021. There's the website. So what's a hold-on parton, or a unit of culture? It's something that's a whole and a part simultaneously. See, for example, the middle-sized unit there. So the large, medium, and small-sized ellipses there are all hold-on partons, but looking at the medium-sized level, that too is a hold-on parton. Here's an expanded side view if the interior parts were kind of pulled out, but they're basically the same thing. So definitions: what is a hold-on parton? It's a unit that's simultaneously a whole and a part. Could be a unit of biology, could be a unit of culture. Let's use that symbol for now to give the general abstract idea. But importantly, a system is also a hold-on parton. It's a part and a whole at the same time because it contains subsystems, which probably contains subsystems, and so on. Atoms are systems, and the solar system is also a system. So a system just has inputs and outputs and an algorithm or a processor inside it, or maybe many processors if it has many subsystems. Anyway, there's a symbol for a system. So a system is a hold-on parton, whether the system is biological or biocultural, say. So units of biology are structured as fractal hold-on partons, so they're self-similar on smaller and larger scales, or sizes, if you like. So there's a symbol for biology, kind of round, curvy. And units of culture, or information, or ideas, processes, and products are also structured as fractal hold-on partons. So there's a symbol for those. It's a little bit more Euclidean geometry rather than looking biological like the one above. Anyway, a hold-on parton is a unit that is simultaneously a whole and a part at the same time. And so here's one big hold-on parton. We've got the multiverse up top. Within that, our universe, let's say. And then within that, we can go down using the three laws as a tool to identify the units and the levels at the same time. So you look for units that execute those three laws all at once. They integrate upward into the larger unit above on scale sizes. They cooperate and compete, or do co-opetition with units on the same scale size level, and they enable agency and structure for the units on the level below which are inside them, or if you want to call it, command and control. So these things are all hold-on partons. We see their different units and levels. So biology and culture are structured the same way, according to the 3 laws of hold-on partons. And so here's the 3 laws again. Integrate upwards, compete and cooperate sideways, enable agency and structure on the level below. And you and I are both systems of systems inside systems of systems. So we are hold-on partons, a part and a whole at the same time. And here in culture, we have some different units and levels. So you might start with a word or a letter right down the bottom. Going up, those 3 laws apply. A morpheme is part of a word, so that integrates upwards into a word. That words integrate upwards into phrases. Phrases integrate upwards into sentences. Then we have paragraphs, sections, chapters, parts, and maybe a whole book. And then moving upwards, bookcases, sections in a library, maybe topic areas, maybe a whole library. You could consider that a hold-on parton, a part and a whole at the same time. And zooming upwards there on the different scales, languages, topics, all information, and earth culture considered as one unit right at the top. So here's an example looking at letters, words, sentences, and paragraphs. Noting how the 3 laws apply there in culture. And so this is the 3 laws applied to various domains in culture. This is what's coming in the book, P3 of EC, an examination of these different domains analysed as hold-on partons, parts and wholes at the same time. So there's your tool for analysing culture or biology. Look for units and levels that do those 3 things all at once. That's a way to identify discrete units in either biology or in culture. So for example, with written words or language as a domain in culture, you've got an alphabetical letter as a unit and level at once. Looking at the 3 laws, we integrate upwards into a morpheme, which is part of a word. That unit integrates upward into a word, which is a part and a whole at the same time. It's also a unit and level. So a word is part of a phrase. A phrase is part of a clause. Clause is part of a sentence. And a sentence is part of a discourse, whether that be a poem, a book, a joke, a scientific theory, what have you. So there's your 3 laws as an analytical tool for discrete units and levels of culture. Now, there was a fantastic question came up in the recent webinar at AppEEL number 3. We can look at cooperation and competition on 2 different axes. So let's look at a sentence. Cooperation goes sideways and competition goes downwards. So what if you had this sentence? The blank sat on the blank. Well, there's 2 empty slots there, as it were. The first slot we could fill with one of these synonyms depending on the goal and the target audience. So you could say the domesticated feline sat on the blank, or you could use the Latin name Felis catus. You could say pussycat. You could call it a moggy, and you could spell it 2 different ways. So there's a competition going on there between all these synonyms, or you could just say cat. And the other slot, empty slot in that sentence, we could put a word in there, or a portmanteau word even, floor covering, carpet, rug, a ruggy, depending, or matte. So let's say this sentence is intended for a children's book, perhaps Dr. Seuss or something. Maybe it'll be, that is the way the competition sort of falls out. But of course, you could use those alternate synonyms there. And so that's what I mean by cooperation, or words operating together to compose a larger whole, so a sentence. And the competition kind of goes vertically rather than the cooperation, which goes horizontally. So whenever we choose between different synonyms, there's often several good reasons for picking one word over another, whether we're looking for scientific precision in an academic article, say, or whether we wish to be smaller, simpler, easier to digest for, say, a children's audience. So that's how one explanation of how cooperation and competition comes into play between units, in this case words, when composing a sentence. And as a counterexample, let's look at this sentence from Chomsky's Syntactic Structures and from an earlier article the year before. This sentence is syntactically correct, but semantically doesn't make a lot of sense. So the cooperation is not really happening there in terms of words cooperating to integrate upwards into a larger concept or sentence or idea. And on the other hand, you could interpret it differently to say something like, say, unemotional environmental ideas go nowhere. So then there's Al Gore with a couple of very high return on investment documentaries, which at times were appealing to emotions, but probably all for a good cause: global warming. And another great question that came up in the AppEEL webinar number 3, are there cancerous words? Well, you can consider syntax or semantics, like we just did with Chomsky's sentence there. The question is cooperation or competition. So you could use inclusive words such as humankind rather than just mankind. So it's and not or thinking. And you could include ideas like universal basic income as opposed to perhaps more competitive ideas such as the invisible hand or trickle-down economics, which have been shown to be kind of flawed ideas. So we have a range of inclusive, benign, or malignant kind of words there. On the right-hand side, you can have racist, sexist, and ageist words. In terms of values and morality, those would be cancerous. And in the middle, you've got sort of benign instances of units of culture. So say silent letters, the K in knife, K-N-I-F-E. It doesn't really do a lot, but it's like a vestigial organ. It's kind of just hanging around until we spell knife phonetically, N-I-F-E, say, or N-Y-F, who knows. The word like, when it's used like as an interjection in like slightly lazy like sentences, I do it all the time. And maybe even weasel words, which can be benign but can be a bit cancerous towards good thinking. A few examples, about 10 actually, come up in Steven Pinker's great book, The Sense of Style. So there's about 10 things from the sense of style that cause soggy prose, as Steven Pinker calls it. But in a sense, all those kind of things don't really pull their own weight in terms of cost-benefit ratios. So you could loosely say these are kind of cancerous units of culture, or turn up as words that may be benign, but may be harmful in some cases. And Andy Norman's book, coming in May 2021, also has some great ideas thinking about ideas, processes and products, mental immunity. How do we guard against things like conspiracy theories, which can be a bit cancerous and may even cause the Capitol riots of January 6th in 2021 in the USA. So certain ideas, processes and products or words can be seen as cancerous or even immoral, or at best they don't have a lot of value. Anyway, highly recommend Andy Norman's Examined Lives webinars on this view of life for more on all that great stuff. And so here's our 3 laws. Maybe when we're looking at biology, it's better to call the 3rd law enabling agency and structure downwards. So that's the 3rd law highlighted there. And over in culture, where we have inanimate objects like books and things that don't really have agency per se, you can call it command and control, because there are rules on the level above, rules of grammar and syntax, that kind of guide or direct what those units on the levels below are doing, whether they're words or letters or what have you, depending on the scale level you're looking at for units and levels of culture. And for more on agency and structure, or structuration theory, which the Newcastle School of Creativity is pretty big on, highly recommend works by Anthony Giddens or Margaret Archer, and my PhD blog goes into structure and agency quite a bit more if of interest. And so there's another book case study. You can look at the units and levels in inanimate culture, external units of culture, say books and movies and poems and songs. When they're outside an organism, you can have those 3 laws, so it's okay to kind of use the term command and control for the 3rd law. So we can see how each of those things obeys the 3rd law as a unit and level, and in fact all 3 laws at once. And so for that reason, I've put command and control units on the level below there, just because inanimate units of culture probably don't have any objections to having rules or canon that guide their agency and structure. I used to be a volunteer rural firefighter as well, so I also don't have that many objections to the term command and control. That can be very useful, and as long as its heart's in the right place, rescuing people, saving lives, all that ethical culture stuff. So biology and culture are structured the same way. The 3 laws of hold-on partons. And here's my 5 prior chapters on evolutionary culturology if of interest. And this leads to ethical culture, where you have the ethicizer examining the ethics of a particular action for as many units and levels as possible. So there's a blog post on that, the URL listed there. And more on all this in the forthcoming book, due in November 2021. And some more on my PhD blog, Storyality. Thanks for being awesome.